In panic, she scattered her little belongings, but the purse was nowhere to be found. All her money was lost. Cindy sat down on the bare floor, her mind blank. She didn't have the energy to cry. So she sat on the floor, looking like a person whose world had crashed. In a remote village in Enugu, there lived an orphaned girl called Cindy. She was a girl used to the life of loneliness and penury. Hers wasn't the normal orphan story where she was treated badly by relatives, but sometimes she can't even tell if hers was worse or better than those kind of stories. She was never accepted by anyone, either her mom's or dad's side. According to everyone, her parents were stingy while they lived, so why would they cater for her now that they are dead? She was left alone with her old paternal grandfather at such a tender age, and she lived with him, learning to do things at an age earlier than should be right. But her grandpa was very old and couldn't do most things. All he could do most times was instruct her on how to do some things because his old bones couldn't anymore. And they manage it however it turns out. Her father was the only child, so she had no direct uncles or aunties to rely upon, but her mother had 5 siblings, yet none of them came forth for her, but she bore no grudge to any of them. After all, they didn't give birth to her. Cindy often wondered what life would have been like if she hadn't been orphaned at such a young age. Her memories of her parents were faint and scattered, like the remnants of a dream after waking. All she had of them was a small photograph tucked away in a weathered box that she carried with her everywhere. They had passed in a car accident when she was barely 7 on their way to pick her up from the village, and she had gone to spend the holidays with her grandpa, leaving her to navigate life alone in her small village in Enugu. Her grandpa, she learned later, had been too old to travel to their base in the city, so he had delegated someone from her mom's side, but the person never returned to give him feedback. And he didn't know where they lived, neither could Cindy give directions. So all her parents had in the city was stolen or was forgotten. With time, Grandpa didn't have any money to pay those who her parents employed to help him out in the village, and they all left one after the other, leaving them to navigate life all by themselves. As the years went by, Cindy learned to survive on her own in the village, relying on her young hands and the distant wisdom of her aging grandfather. She was no longer the little girl who cried for her parents. Those tears had dried long ago. Life had taught her to endure, to wake up every morning and tend to the fields, to fetch water, and to cook the meager meals that sustained her and her grandfather. Her grandfather, Papa Obina, had once been a strong man, at least that's what the village elders used to say. But age had worn him down. His hands trembled with arthritis, his legs too weak to carry him far. Yet he loved Cindy fiercely. And though he couldn't do much anymore, he passed down stories and wisdom as his way of caring for her. Life, Papa Obina would say in his raspy voice, is like the yam we plant in the ground. You don't see it growing, but under the soil, it pushes its way, reaching for the sun. You, my child, are like that yam. Don't ever give up, even when the world around you is dry and hard. Cindy would nod, pretending to understand, though her mind was often preoccupied with the chores she needed to finish before the sun set. Her life in the village was a cycle of routine tasks and her silent dreams. She had learned to make peace with the loneliness, her heart growing used to the quiet emptiness that followed her like a shadow. But deep inside, there was a yearning she couldn't quite name. a desire to escape the weight of her reality, to find something more than what she had. One fateful afternoon, when Cindy was around 12 years old, a traveling merchant from the nearby town of Osoka passed through the village. He brought with him news, trinkets, and stories of a world beyond the village. Places filled with opportunities, bustling cities where one could make a living far from the hardship of village life. Cindy listened intently as the man spoke to a group of villagers gathered under a large Iroko tree. Her curiosity burned brighter than ever before. The idea of leaving the village, of escaping the poverty and isolation, took root in her mind. But how? She had no money, no family connections, and no one to rely on except Papa Obina, who was becoming frailer by the day. That night, as she helped her grandfather into bed, Cindy's thoughts swelled with possibilities. "Grandpa," she said softly, "have you ever thought about leaving this village? Going somewhere bigger?" Papa Obina looked at her with tired eyes, a sad smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "I was born here and I will die here, child. But you are different. You have a fire in you, Cindy. You are not meant to live and die in this village." His words struck her deeply, as if he had given her permission to dream. "But how can I live, Grandpa? I have nothing." "You have something far more valuable than money," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have your strength, and one day, that strength will take you farther than you can imagine." Cindy lay awake that night, staring at the cracked ceiling of their small house, thinking about her future. The next day, she made a decision. She would save every bit of money she could, no matter how long it took. And when the time was right, she would leave the village. She had no choice than to learn early on that survival was something you had to fight for. She worked odd jobs, doing everything from sweeping market stalls to fetching water for neighbors. School was a luxury she could barely afford, but she fought to attend by begging her grandpa to enroll her in the local government welfare school. The teachers didn't teach much, but she used the materials provided by the government to the best of her ability. She would study by the dim light of kerosene lamps, determined to make something of herself despite the odds. It was during one of these nights, while reading a tattered textbooks, that Cindy allowed herself to dream. She always remembered what her grandfather had told her about her strength and intends to make full use of it someday. She would move to the city, get a job, and finally leave the village behind. She didn't know how or when, but she was determined to break free of the life that held her back. But she couldn't leave her grandpa behind because she didn't have enough money to pay anybody to take care of him. So she stayed behind, working hard in her studies and any odd jobs she could get to add to the income she earned selling their palm produce. At the age of 15, tragedy struck again when she lost her grandpa, and finally, she understood what it means to be truly alone in the world. The community and the church raised funds to help bury him, and after the simple ceremony ended, Cindy felt the world closing in on her, and the sorrow nearly broke her. One day, weeks after the death of her grandpa, Cindy was running market errands for a rich man's wife in the village when someone stopped her and asked if she knows a Mrs. Adlin. Cindy nearly said no, until she remembered that was her mother's name. It's been so long she had thought of her parents that she had nearly forgotten their names. That gave her a jolt she would have to examine later. "She was my mother," Cindy replied to the woman, wondering who she was. "So you are Cindy, if I'm not mistaken." "Yes, ma. But who are you? And how did you know my mom?" she asked. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed as she said, "Mom." "Oh, your mom was my friend and customer, and when I heard what happened to her, I couldn't locate her again." "So how did you know who I was?" Cindy asked, curious. The woman chuckled and said, You are the spitting image of your mother. At first, I thought you were her ghost." She continued to chuckle, but stopped when she realized it wasn't funny to the young girl. "I am sorry. I must sound insensitive to you now. I am really sorry about your parent. How have you been coping all these years?" The woman said, looking sorry, really noticing how lean and shabby she looked. But to her credit, though her clothes were shabby and torn in some places, but they were very clean and she looked neat even though she was a bit thin. Cindy shrugged but said nothing. Her throat was too tight for words to pass through, and she was afraid that if she should open her mouth, her tears may not be able to stop, so she said nothing. But the woman seemed to understand, and she simply touched the young girl's shoulders in consolation, deciding not to pry. "I owe your mother some money," she said, coming to a decision. That had Cindy looking up at her with shock. The woman nodded. "Yes, just before her death. She made some orders, but when I didn't hear from her after some weeks, I made some inquiries and discovered she had died shortly after she made the payment. But I didn't know who to give the money as her shop was closed and I didn't have your house address." Cindy couldn't believe what she was hearing. Does people like her exist? She wondered. Even her relatives didn't care about her. So how can a total stranger be dishonest? But the woman's thoughts brought her out of her thoughts. "Do you want me to give you the money now, or do you want the goods your mother ordered? I know the money equivalent won't be the same as the time she made the order, but I'm willing to give you the same quantity of goods if you would prefer the goods. I want to honor your mother's memory," she said simply. The whole thing was too much of a shock to Cindy, and she didn't know how to process the kindness. So she stood there looking lost and confused. "I don't know what to say, ma," she said at last. "I understand," the woman said. "This is what we will do. Take me to your house so I can speak with the adult in your family and we can conclude on how to repay the money." Cindy shook her head. "I don't have any adult. I stay alone." "What do you mean?" the woman asked, looking doubtfully at Cindy. "Alright, can I at least know where you are staying?" "I stay at my father's house. I used to live with my grandfather, but he recently passed, so I am alone now. You can find out from anyone in the village." "I'm not lying, ma," Cindy said, her eyes pleading. "It's okay, I believe you," the woman replied, touching her gently on the shoulder. "So what are you doing at the market?" she asked Cindy. "I came to buy some things for a woman. It's part of what I do to earn a living." The woman nodded, her heart breaking at the life such a young girl had to live, especially knowing how her mother doted on her while she was alive. So she allowed Cindy to go run the errand she came for. Later in the week, Mrs. Etok traced her to the house as Cindy described, and when she came to the house, she wept in her heart at the callousness of humans, but she made up her mind to do what little she can. She would have loved to help the girl more, but her business was shaking, and if she could remove this money now, she doesn't know how she will make the next order. But the money was not hers to begin with, and it has been weighing heavily on her mind these many years, so she was glad to be free of it at last, even if it means she would be drawn tight for a long time. So she gives Cindy the full amount her mother had paid, advising her to come to Lagos. Cindy said she knows no one there, but the woman offered to help her with accommodation until Cindy was old enough to fend for herself. The news was beyond what she had ever dreamed. Cindy felt overwhelmed, and in return, she offered the money back to the woman. But the kind woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Ertok, declined and told her when she comes to the address she dropped for her in Lagos, she would take the money then and use it to teach her the business her mother used to do. Cindy felt hope rising in her chest after all these years. She felt there was a future for her, even though it was slightly different than she dreamed, but she would take anything if it was better than what she has now. That night, Cindy couldn't sleep. She sat up on her bed, dreaming of when she could finally go to Lagos and begin a new life. She would have followed Mrs. Etok straight away, but she wanted to mourn her grandpa properly, as it has only been 2 weeks after his passing, and it requires 3 weeks for you to mourn your loved one properly in her village. And she wanted to do right by her grandpa. She couldn't mourn her parents properly because she didn't understand fully what was happening then, but now she will mourn her grandpa to the best of her ability and move on with her life. But the morning when she was set to travel, she couldn't locate the piece of paper where she wrote Mrs. Etok's address. She turned the house inside out, upside down, but couldn't find it. Cindy cried like she had never cried because it felt like the world was conniving against her again. Without that address, she couldn't possibly go to Lagos now because what would she be doing there? The money wasn't much as to give her leverage without Mrs. Etok's help. She sat down, cried from morning until evening, lost and hopeless. Her mind had wandered everywhere, looking for every possibility, but she still doesn't know what to do. Every information about Mrs. Etok was on that piece of paper, and she didn't cram or read it twice because she was so excited and had gone to place the paper carefully in her school bag. So she won't misplace it, but now the paper had grown wings and disappeared. She suddenly found herself outside at her grandpa's freshly dug graveside, crying again. She doesn't know what to do, doesn't have anyone to rely upon now. While she lay there crying, an idea began to form in her head. What if she travels to Lagos by herself? Yes, she may not know anybody, but like her grandpa was fond of saying, you never go, you never know. Whatever that may mean for him, she will have to go to be sure, because anything is better than staying here languishing. With this in her mind, she got up, went into the house, arranged it again and laid down to sleep. A certain peace had taken over her, so she slept better than she had ever done since her grandpa died. The following morning, she went to her parents' graves and that of her grandpa to bid them farewell. She was sad at leaving behind the life she had known for these many years, leaving behind the only people who truly cared for her, but she had to do something about her life or she might never make it. She promised that she will remain the good girl they had taught her to be, and she will return someday with good news. With that vow, Cindy turned and left for the city. The first lap of her journey took her to Nsukka, where she planned to board the bus to Lagos and a new beginning. The bustling town was a stark contrast to the quiet village life she had known. People moved quickly, cars honked, and the noise of the market filled the air. It was overwhelming at first, but Cindy reminded herself of her grandfather's words, "You have your strength." She was able to locate the park where Lagos buses were calling for passengers, and she was directed to where she will make payment. But on reaching for her purse, where her money was kept, she couldn't find it again. In panic, she scattered her little belongings, but the purse was nowhere to be found. All her money was lost. Cindy sat down on the bare floor, her mind blank. She didn't have the energy to cry. So she sat on the floor, looking like a person whose world had crashed. A woman noticed her and went to find out what the problem was. Cindy was looking at the woman like she had 10 heads. She wasn't understanding what the woman was asking, so she couldn't give her an answer. After the woman had stood there for a few minutes, she left since the young girl didn't want to respond to her questions. When the last bus left, an attendant came to her, then with a cold water and some buns, helped her to gather her clothes and other meager belongings, then lifted her from the floor and sat her down on a bench, handing her over the food and water he brought. But Cindy refused to collect. She doesn't think she can keep anything down because she feels so sick that she might throw up anything that enters her mouth now. But she nodded gratefully at the young man who had sat down beside her without saying a word. After what felt like forever, Cindy cleared her throat and began to tell her story to the kind, silent stranger. She can't tell why she did that, but before she knows what she was going to do, she was already talking, and when she started, she couldn't stop. The young man sat silently and listened. When she was done speaking, he brought out a book and a pen and wrote something down and showed her. She read it, and that was when the tears came. She cried and cried until the tears couldn't come anymore. He was a deaf and dumb, but he got most of what she said because he could read lips. He had written. Here was someone who was handicapped and probably with a worse story than her own, being kind and optimistic. But she was feeling pity for herself because of money. At least, she wasn't physically challenged, and with her strength, she can recover any money. She wiped her face, feeling encouraged in the stranger's kindness and optimism. My name is Obioma, and I am deaf and dumb. And I have never known my parents, but I am alive. I am healthy and strong. We will all be alright at last, so please don't give up. Those were the words he had written, and she will never forget them as long as she lives. Obioma, the deaf and dumb guy, introduced her to a Mama Ogo, who took her in as a cleaner in her local restaurant. The pay was meager, but it was enough to survive. Cindy worked hard, keeping to herself as she navigated this new world. Every night, she would return to the small room Mama Ogo gave her to share with 3 other young girls her age. She doesn't know their story, but she hoped that they all get to go along the way. On her first night in the city alone, she felt tired but hopeful. She had made it this far surely. There was more ahead of her. The heat of the afternoon clung to the air as Cindy swept the floor of the small restaurant in Nsukka. The rhythm of her movement calming her mind after a long day. The clatter of cutlery and soft murmurs of customers drifted through the room, but she paid little attention to the patrons. This was her routine, a job that kept her hands busy and her thoughts distant from the reality of her struggles. It was a modest restaurant, tucked away on the corner of a busy street. The kind of place where the locals gathered for simple meals and business travelers occasionally passed through. Cindy had taken the job after arriving in Nsukka with nothing more than the money she had saved from selling produce in her village. Though it was far from the life she had dreamed of, it was a start. That day, however, something felt different. She noticed a man seated at a table near the back, a man who stood out among the usual crowd of villagers and passerby. He was tall, well dressed in a sharp tailored suit that seemed out of place in the rustic setting of the restaurant. His presence commanded attention, yet he sat quietly, observing his surroundings with a detached calm. Cindy tried not to stare, but curiosity tugged at her. What was a man like him doing in such a modest place? He had an air of success about him, the kind of confidence that came with having seen more of the world than the dusty streets of Nsukka could offer. And she moved to wipe down a nearby table. The man glanced up, his eyes locking with hers for a brief moment. There was something in his gaze that made Cindy pause. It wasn't the casual look of a customer acknowledging the staff. It was deeper, almost as if he saw something in her that no one else had noticed. "You work hard," the man said, his voice low and steady. His tone wasn't condescending, but rather observational, as though he was speaking to an equal. Cindy straightened, surprised that he was addressing her. "I try to," she replied, unsure of where the conversation was going. The man's lips curved into a small smile. "I have been sitting here for a while, and I have watched you move. You remind me of someone who knows what it means to fight for survival." Cindy's brow furrowed. She didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't often that someone commented on her efforts or on anything beyond her surface. Most people ignored her, just another girl trying to make a living. But this man's word seemed to cut past the mundane, as if he saw her struggles even before she had spoken a word. I don't know if we are alike, Simdi said cautiously, but I do what I have to do. The man leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. What's your name? He asked. Simdi. Simdi, he repeated, testing the name on his tongue as if committing it to memory. I'm Emeka. The name meant nothing to her at first, just another stranger passing through Nsukka. But there was something about the way he carried himself, something in his tone, his ease, that made her wonder who he really was. Simdi continued wiping the table, feeling slightly self-conscious under his gaze. You are not from here, she stated, more as an observation than a question. Emeka chuckled softly. No, I'm not. I grew up in Lagos, but I've spent the last few years building businesses all over Nigeria. Nsukka is just one stop on a long list. Simdi nodded. It made sense now why he looked so out of place in the small restaurant. A businessman passing through town on his way to more important things. And yet, there was a quiet intensity about him that didn't fit the image of a detached executive. He seemed too interested in her in this moment. What kind of business are you in? She asked, more out of politeness than genuine curiosity. She didn't expect someone like him to share much with her. Real estate mostly, Emeka replied, but I have got my hands in a few other ventures, tech startups, import-export. I like to keep things varied. Simdi nodded again, though the world of real estate and startups was far beyond her understanding. Still, there was something about the way Emeka spoke that made her feel he wasn't trying to impress her. He spoke matter-of-factly, without the arrogance she often associated with men who held power. As she finished cleaning the table, she felt his eyes still on her. You don't belong here, you know, Emeka said suddenly, his voice soft but firm. Simdi froze, gripping the cloth in her hand. Excuse me. I mean in this place, Emeka clarified, gesturing around the restaurant. You are working hard, yes, but I can see you are made for more than this. You have got that look in your eyes, the one that says you are waiting for something bigger, even if you don't know what it is yet. Simdi blinked, unsure of how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, as if she were more than just a cleaner in a small town restaurant. She had spent so many years scraping by, taking whatever work she could find, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to dream of something more. I'm just trying to survive, she said quietly, avoiding his gaze. Emeka leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Surviving is important, but it's not enough. You have got potential, Simdi. I can see it, even if you can't. Simdi felt a strange mixture of pride and caution welling up inside her. She didn't know what Emeka wanted from her, or why he was saying these things, but part of her wanted to believe him. She had spent so long thinking that her life was confined to the small spaces she occupied, that maybe she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emeka smiled, though there was a sadness in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. Because I know what it feels like to be stuck in a place that doesn't fit you. I came from nothing, Simdi. I clawed my way out of poverty, made something of myself. But it wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. You remind me of the person I used to be, the person who fought to make something out of nothing. Simdi stared at him, her heart pounding. She didn't know this man, didn't know if she could trust him. But there was something in his words that resonated with her, something that made her feel like he understood the struggles she had endured. I don't know what my future holds, Simdi said finally, her voice steady, despite the emotion swelling inside her. but I have learned not to expect too much. Emeka nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what she meant. Well, if you ever decide you want more, if you ever want to break free from this place, I could help you. I have got connections, resources. I'm not saying it will be easy, but if you want it, I can help you find a way. Simdi didn't know what to say. Part of her wanting to dismiss his offer, to retreat back into the safety of her routine. But another part of her, the part that had always dreamed of something bigger, felt a flicker of hope. I will think about it, she said quietly. Emeka smiled again, a genuine warmth in his expression. That's all I ask. As Simdi walked away, her mind buzzed with the possibilities that Emeka's words had opened up. She didn't know what her future held, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Over the next few weeks, Emeka continued to visit the small restaurant whenever his business brought him to Nsukka. At first, their conversations were brief, polite, exchanges about work, the weather, or passing comments on the people who came in and out of the restaurant. But each time, there was an unspoken understanding between them, something simmering just beneath the surface. Simdi found herself looking forward to Emeka's visit, even though she wasn't sure what to make of them. There was a part of her that remained cautious, wary of letting herself believe in the possibilities he represented. But another part of her, the part that had spent years quietly longing for an escape from her life of hardship, was drawn to his words, to the way he made her feel like she was capable of more than just survival. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the restaurant began to empty out, Emeka stayed longer than usual, sipping his drink slowly as if he had no intention of leaving. I have been thinking about what you said, Cindy admitted, wiping down the bar in front of him. About leaving this place. Emeka raised an eyebrow, his attention fully on her own, and Cindy hesitated, glancing out the window at the fading light. I don't know if I'm ready. This place, it's all I have ever known. Emeka nodded thoughtfully. I understand. Leaving behind what is familiar can be terrifying, but staying in a place that no longer serves you, that's its own kind of trap. Cindy's heart fluttered at his words. He spoke with the kind of certainty she had never had. He made it sound so simple, as if the choice to leave her old life behind was as easy as deciding to take a different path. But what if I fail? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emeka smiled, a softness in his eyes that caught her off guard. Failure is part of the journey. I have failed more times than I can count. But every failure taught me something valuable, something that helped me move forward. You won't know what you are capable of until you take that first step. Cindy looked down at the clothes in her hand, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent so long scraping by, doing whatever it took to survive, that the idea of striving for something more, something better, felt almost foreign to her. But Emeka's words stirred something deep inside her, something that made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a life beyond the confines of this small restaurant. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Emeka leaned forward, his gaze intense but kind. That's normal, but you can't let fear hold you back. You have already survived so much, Cindy. You are stronger than you think. The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever believed in her the way Emeka seemed to. For so long, she had carried the weight of her circumstances alone, convinced that her life was destined to be one of struggle and hardship. But now, with Emeka's offer hanging in the air, it felt like there was a door opening in front of her, a door that led to a future she had never dared to imagine. I will think about it, she said quietly, her voice steadier this time. Emeka smiled, a look of understanding passing between them. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension, as Cindy wrestled with the decision that lay before her. She went about her usual routine, cleaning tables, serving customers, sweeping floors, but her mind was always elsewhere, lost in thoughts of what her life could be if she took Emeka's offer. She thought about her grandfather, about the quiet wisdom he had imparted to her over the years. He had always told her that she was meant for something greater, that she had a fire inside her that would one day lead her to a life beyond the village. But Cindy had never truly believed him and never allowed herself to hope for more until now. One evening, as she sat alone in her small room, staring at the faded photograph of her parents, Cindy made a decision. She couldn't stay in this place forever, waiting for something to change. After all, Lagos was her original destination before the sad incidents of losing her purse. Maybe this was God making a way for her at last. She had to take control of her own destiny, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. The next day, when Emeka came to the restaurant, she approached him with a newfound determination in her eyes. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I want to leave." Emeka's face broke into a smile, one of quiet pride. "I knew you had it in you." Leaving Nsukka was harder than Cindy had anticipated. When she told Mama Ogo of her intentions, the kind woman had been sad but had no choice than to let her go. She had made Cindy promise that she would always stay in touch. It was a bittersweet farewell. But it was harder to leave Obioma, the brother God had given her as a gift. She told him to come with her, but he refused, telling her to go and make it, then return to make him proud. When she started crying, he held her, doing his best not to cry too. She wasn't dying or anything like that, he thought. He would see her again. Eventually, they escorted her to the bus park, where she boarded the first class because Emeka insisted he must pay for her transportation. But she vehemently refused to take a flight, so they settled for a first-class bus ticket. As the bus carried her away from the town of Nsukka, she felt a pang of loss, not for the place itself, but for the life she was leaving behind, the familiar routine, the safety of knowing what each day would bring. But there was also a thrill coursing through her veins, an excitement she hadn't felt in years. She was moving forward, stepping into a future that was hers to shape. Emeka had arranged everything. He had found her a small apartment in Lagos, fancy enough to give her a solid start. He had restrained himself enough not to go overboard, knowing how difficult it is for her to accept his gift. This apartment and all he had offered were accepted after he agreed that she would pay back once she had found her feet. He only agreed so peace would reign. He had no intention whatsoever to take a dime from her, but she doesn't have to know that, does she? He chuckled to himself. His PA has been looking at him strangely since he came back from his recent trip to Enugu. He has been very happy, which was weird because inasmuch as his boss was a kind, generous man, he never really saw him as a happy man. But whatever was making him whistle and chuckle to himself, he was all for it. Mr. Emeka deserved to be happy. Emeka had also connected her with people who could help her find work. She had bluntly refused to work with him. According to her, she wanted to be sure of her own growth. So, he had promised that he would be there to guide her if she needed it. Lagos was unlike anything Cindy had ever experienced. The city was alive with energy, a constant buzz of activity that both thrilled and overwhelmed her. The streets were crowded with cars and people. The noise of the city, a constant backdrop to her new life. It was intimidating at first, but Cindy quickly learned to navigate the chaos, finding her place in the rhythm of the city. It was way different to the slow pace of Enugu. She had been wrong when she thought Enugu was rough at first. She found work at a small law firm as an administrative assistant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a far cry from the life she had left behind. The pay was better, and she was able to save a little each month. Slowly, building a sense of security that had always felt out of reach. Emeka kept to his words, checking in on her from time to time. Their relationship had grown beyond the chance meeting in Abuja. They spent time together whenever his busy schedule allowed. Dinners, long conversations about life and business, moments that made Cindy feel like she had found not only a mentor but a friend. But as Cindy settled into her new life, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to disrupt the fragile balance she had found. It wasn't long before Cindy learned that Emeka's world wasn't as straightforward as she had imagined. Though he had built a successful career and a comfortable life, there were complications, specifically a woman named Helen. One evening, after a particular long day at work, Emeka had taken Cindy out to dinner at a high-end restaurant in Victoria Island. The atmosphere was different from the casual spots they usually frequented, and Cindy couldn't help but feel a little out of place among the wealthy people. As they sat down, Emeka seemed more tense than usual, his smile not reaching his eyes. Cindy noticed the change but didn't say anything, unsure of what was on his mind. Halfway through the meal, the reason for his unease became clear. Helen walked to their table. She was tall, with sleek hair that fell effortlessly around her shoulders. Her presence commanding attention the moment she stepped into the room. She moved with a kind of confidence that only came from someone who had never doubted their place in the world. When she entered, she had gone to a table opposite theirs, but Cindy didn't see her until she stood up and started walking towards them. Helen had scanned the room when she walked in earlier until her eyes landed on Emeka and then on Cindy. Cindy felt her heart drop as Helen approached their table, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Emeka," Helen said smoothly, her voice like a silk. "It's been a while." Emeka's jaw tightened, but he forced a polite smile. "Helen." Cindy felt invisible as the two exchanged pleasantries. Her presence reduced to nothing more than a bystander in the middle of a silent battle. She could sense the tension between them, the unresolved history that hung heavy in the air. Helen's eyes flicked to Cindy, her smile widening slightly. "And who is this?" she asked, her tone laced with veiled hostility. "This is Cindy," Emeka said, his eyes turning warm when he looked at Cindy. "She's my girlfriend." Cindy forced a smile, but instead, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wasn't sure if it was Helen's presence or Emeka's sudden shift in demeanor, but something about the encounter felt wrong. Helen's gaze lingered on Cindy for a moment, longer before she turned back to Emeka. "Well, it was nice seeing you again, Emeka. Let's catch up soon. Remember the meeting with the Arabs?" With that, she walked away, leaving a silence that felt heavier than her presence had been. Cindy sat in silence after Helen left, her appetite fading as the weight of the encounter settled over her. Emeka's tension was palpable, his hands clenched around the fork he hadn't touched in several minutes. He stared after Helen, his face unreadable, but the tension in his jaw betrayed the turmoil simmering beneath the surface. "Who is she really?" Cindy asked softly, her voice cutting through the silence between them. Even though she knows all about her, but she wanted to hear it from Emeka. Emeka looked at her, his expression turned between frustration and something else. Anger, maybe. He exhaled, setting his fork down with a controlled movement, as though he was afraid of letting his emotions spill over. "Helen and we have a complicated history," he admitted, his eyes flickering towards the door where Helen had disappeared. "We were together for years, and when it ended, it didn't end well. She hurts me in ways I didn't expect." Cindy frowned, knowing there was more to the story than Emeka was letting on. "And now? Why is she still around?" Emeka hesitated, his gaze falling to his glass. "She's still involved in some of my business dealings. I tried to cut ties with her, but it's not that simple. There are things we have built together, investment, shared interest. It's complicated." The knot in Cindy's stomach tightened. She knew from their earlier conversations that Emeka had been hurt deeply in his past. But hearing him talk about Helen now made it clear that this wasn't just old baggage. Helen wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was still a living part of his present, lurking in the shadows of his life. Do you still have feelings for her? Cindy asked, her voice quiet now, more vulnerable than she intended. Emeka's eyes shot up to meet hers, surprise flickering across his face. No, he said firmly. Whatever I felt for Helen ended a long time ago. She betrayed me in ways I can't forgive. Cindy wanted to believe him, but the way Helen had looked at Emeka, the familiarity, the unspoken connection between them made her doubt. She had never seen Emeka so uneasy, so guided, and that made her feel like there was still a part of him that was tied to Helen, whether he admitted it or not. Helen was more than just a name whispered in passing. She was Emeka's ex-girlfriend, a woman who had once held a significant place in his life. Their relationship had ended badly. She had cheated severally and Emeka kept forgiving until he found out by chance that she was planning on getting pregnant for the other guy and pinning it on him because he had more money to give her the life she wanted. The relationship left scars on Emeka that ran deeper than he had let on. But it wasn't just the emotional baggage that concerned Cindy. Helen was still involved in some of Emeka's business dealings, and her presence cast a long shadow over their growing relationship. I just don't want her to be a problem, Cindy said, trying to steady her voice. For us. Emeka reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm, his gaze intent. Cindy, you have nothing to worry about, okay? I'm with you now. Helen is part of my past. But you are mine now and my future. Cindy wanted to believe him, and part of her did, but another part of her, the part that had lived through abandonment and disappointment, couldn't help but feel a quiet fear creeping into her heart. She didn't know much about Helen, except what she had heard here and there, but something about her felt dangerous, like a storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. In the weeks that followed, Cindy tried to put Helen out of her mind, focusing instead on her work and her growing relationship with Emeka. The more time they spent together, the more Cindy felt herself falling for him. Emeka was attentive, supportive, and always made her feel like she was the most important person in this world. But even with Emeka's reassurances, the shadow of Helen lingered. As much as Emeka liked Cindy, he couldn't ignore the voice in the back of his mind that reminded him of Helen's betrayal. Every time he felt himself getting closer to Cindy, that doubt would creep in. Cindy, however, was patient with him. She noticed his reluctance to fully open up, but she understood the hurt that came from betrayal. After all, her whole life had been one long experience of being let down. They bonded over their shared pain and aspirations for the future. With time, Emeka began to trust Cindy more, though part of him remained guarded, unable to fully let go of the past. Their relationship blossomed despite the challenges. Emeka introduced Cindy to a new world, one of luxury and possibility. He supported her dreams and even encouraged her to pursue further education. Cindy, in turn, brought a sense of groundedness to Emeka's life. She reminded him of the importance of humility, and in her, he found the comfort and stability he had longed for since Helen's betrayal. However, as their bond grew stronger, so did the quiet jealousy of those around them, most notably Helen. She hadn't fully left Emeka's life, having maintained professional ties to him through his business. Her return was subtle at first, an occasional email, a phone call, but then, when she noticed how much Cindy meant to him, her strategy shifted. Helen had always believed that no one could replace her in Emeka's life, and seeing him happy with someone else stirred her sense of entitlement. She decided to take action. Helen knew that the key to undoing Emeka and Cindy's relationship lay in exploiting Emeka's one weakness, his inability to fully trust after her betrayal. She started small, whispered comments to some of Emeka's staff, rumors about Cindy's past that Helen fabricated. Then, she enlisted the help of a few of Emeka's employees, bribing them to manipulate conversations and messages that reached Emeka's ears. Over time, the seeds of doubt began to sprout. At first, Emeka tried to push the thought aside, Cindy had been nothing but loyal and supportive, but Helen's plan worked its poison. He found himself scrutinizing Cindy's every move, wondering if there was something he had missed, some sign that she wasn't who she claimed to be. As the weeks went by, the tension in Emeka's mind grew, fueled by Helen's quiet manipulations. Cindy noticed the change, but Emeka brushed off her concerns, insisting he was just stressed from work. The man, who had once been so attentive, who had shared his hopes and dreams with her, was now distant. His silence is heavy with something unspoken. Cindy tried her best to ignore it. She threw herself into her work and her studies, focusing on the future they had both promised each other. But the cracks were becoming harder to ignore. The small moment, Emeka glancing at his phone with a frown, the way he seemed preoccupied, even when they were alone, made her feel as though she was slowly losing him. One evening, after a long day, Cindy prepared Emeka's favorite meal in the hope of bringing back the warmth they once shared. She set the table carefully, lighting candles and arranging flowers, trying to recreate the intimacy of their early days together. When Emeka came home, she greeted him with a smile. "I made your favorite," she said softly, pulling out his chair. "Thought we could have a nice quiet evening." Emeka looked tired, his face drawn as though he had aged overnight. He sat down without a word, his silence heavy. As they ate, Cindy tried to engage him in conversation, talking about her day, her studies, and some of the people she had met. But Emeka's response was brief, almost curt, his attention clearly elsewhere. Finally, Cindy couldn't take it anymore. "Emeka, what's going on? You have been so distant lately. Did I do something wrong?" For a moment, Emeka didn't respond. He set his fork down slowly and looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and doubt. "Cindy," he began, his voice tense. "I don't know what's going on, but things feel different." "Different?" Cindy echoed, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I have been trying my best." "It's not about what you are doing," Emeka interrupted, his tone sharper than he intended. "It's just, I keep hearing things, people saying things that don't make sense about you." Cindy's heart sank. "What are you talking about? What things?" Emeka rubbed his forehead, clearly struggling with himself. "I don't know who to believe anymore. Some of my staff, they have been talking about you, about your past." Cindy felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. "My past? Emeka, you know everything about me. Why would you listen to them?" "I don't want to believe them," Emeka said, his voice rising with frustration. "But how do I know what's true? You were so secretive about your life before we met, and now I'm hearing things about you being unfaithful." Cindy stared at him, her chest tightening. "You think I'm cheating on you?" Her voice cracked with the weight of the accusation. "After everything we have been through?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Emeka's voice was strained with the conflict raging inside him. I can't go through what I went through with Helen again. I can't let myself be made a fool again." Cindy's eyes filled with tears, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "I am not Helen. I have never betrayed you. How can you even compare me to her?" Emeka looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The silence between them was suffocating. While Cindy and Emeka's relationship deteriorated, Helen watched from the shadows, satisfied with the cracks she had created. But she wasn't finished. She wanted to destroy Cindy completely. Helen had learned that one of Emeka's key staff members, Tunde, had a particular weakness for money. She approached him with an offer, one that he couldn't refuse. His task was simple: fabricate evidence just enough to push Emeka over the edge. Cindy began to notice small things, subtle changes in Emeka's behavior. Moments when he seemed distant, distracted. He would leave the room to take phone calls in private, his voice low and tense when he returned. Once, when Cindy asked him about the calls, Emeka brushed it off, claiming it was just business. But Cindy couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. The whispers didn't help. Cindy had overheard Emeka's staff more than once, making snide comments about her, comparing her to Helen in ways that cut deeper than she cared to admit. She is nice enough, one of Emeka's assistants had said during a lunch break when they thought Cindy wasn't listening. But she's no Helen. Emeka always had a thing for strong, sophisticated women. I don't know what he sees in Cindy. It was those kind of remarks that planted the first seed of insecurity in Cindy's heart. She had never felt the need to compare herself to anyone before, but now, in the face of Helen's lingering presence, she couldn't help but wonder if she was enough for Emeka. When Emeka began to pull away slightly, taking more phone calls in private and seemed distracted during their time together, Cindy's fear grew. She didn't want to confront him, afraid that if she voiced her concerns, it would only confirm her worst fear, that she wasn't good enough for him, that Emeka still had feelings for Helen, even if he wouldn't admit it. Cindy had tried to push the thought aside to focus on her work and her budding independence. But the more she thought about Helen, the more she felt the distance between her and Emeka widening. She couldn't shake the feeling that Helen was always there, hovering in the background, waiting for the right moment to reinsert herself into Emeka's life. The anonymous text messages didn't help either. One of it read, "He's seen her again. Ask him about it." As they sat eating one evening, Emeka had excused himself to take a phone call, and Cindy stared at her phone for what felt like hours, going through the anonymous messages, her heart racing as she wondered who had sent them. Was it true? Was Emeka seeing Helen behind her back? The thought of confronting him terrified her, but the uncertainty was eating her alive. She needed to know the truth. After a few minutes, curiosity got the best of her. She stood up, intending to head to the restroom, but her feet carried her outside instead. She paused near the entrance, just out of sight, and overheard snippets of Emeka's conversation. "You can't keep calling me like this," Emeka was saying, his voice sharp with frustration. "We agreed to keep things professional." There was a pause. Then he spoke again, lower this time. "I'm with Cindy now, Helen. You need to respect that." Cindy's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, not wanting to hear anymore. She returned to her seat inside the restaurant, her mind spinning. Helen was still contacting Emeka, and despite his reassurances, it was clear that there was more going on than he had told her. When Emeka returned to the table, he smiled at her, but Cindy could barely manage to return it. Doubt was creeping into her heart, gnawing at the edges of the trust she had started to build. Cindy's hands trembled as she stared at the message. She had no idea who had sent it, but the implications were clear. Helen was still in Emeka's life, and despite his promises, it seemed like there was more going on than he had let on. That night, when Cindy confronted Emeka, the tension between them came to a head. "Is it true?" Cindy asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "Are you still seeing Helen?" Emeka looked taken aback by the accusation, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What? No, Cindy, I told you she's part of my past." "Then, why is she still in your life? Why is she still calling you?" Cindy's voice rose, the frustration and doubt that had been building inside her spilling over. Emeka's expression hardened. "She's part of my business, Cindy. I can't just cut her out completely." Cindy shook her head, her heart aching. "I've heard the rumors, Emeka. People are talking about me, saying I don't belong with you. And now, I'm getting messages saying you are still seeing her." Emeka's eyes narrowed. "What messages? Who is sending you these lies?" "I don't know," Cindy exclaimed, her voice cracking. "But I need to know the truth, Emeka. I can't keep living like this, always wondering if I'm enough for you." Emeka stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Cindy standing there, her heart breaking as the weight of her doubt crushed her. The following days were filled with silence. Emeka didn't reach out, and Cindy was left to wonder if their relationship had been shattered beyond repair. The whispers grew louder, and Cindy's fear that Helen had won became a painful reality she couldn't escape. One night, everything came to a head. Cindy was walking home from work when she saw Emeka's car parked outside the familiar building. It was the building where Helen lived. Cindy's heart pounded in her chest as she approached, her breath catching in her throat as she saw Emeka step out of the car. He was with Helen. Cindy froze, watching in horror as they exchanged a few words before Helen leaned in, her hand brushing against Emeka's arm in a way that felt far too intimate. Cindy stood frozen, watching the scene in front of her unfold like a slow motion nightmare. There, across the street, was Emeka, and next to him, with her hand resting on his arm, as though it belonged there, was Helen. Cindy's breath caught in her throat, her heart thudding painfully in her chest, as Helen suddenly kissed Emeka, putting her hand around his neck. The world seemed narrow to just the two of them, and everything else, the busy Lagos street, the honking cars, the evening light, faded into the background. She had feared this moment, but seeing it with her own eyes made the pain sharper than any whispered rumor or anonymous text message could have ever caused. For a second, Cindy wanted to believe that this was just another business meeting, that Helen's presence was purely professional. But Emeka, he wasn't pushing her away. He wasn't shaking off her touch and kisses or creating distance between them. He stood there, letting it happen. It felt like a betrayal of the worst kind. Cindy's thoughts spiraled, and the insecurity she had been fighting for weeks finally overwhelmed her. Every doubt, every fear came crashing down on all at once. She had never been enough, not for Emeka, not for anyone. She had always known it deep down, but seeing them together now made it undeniable. Her legs felt weak beneath her, but she couldn't move. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the man she loved standing so close to the woman she feared most. The woman who still held a piece of his past, and it seemed a piece of his present. Finally, Emeka glanced in her direction, his eyes met hers across the distance. And for a split second, the world seemed to stop. Cindy saw recognition in his face, the surprise that quickly turned to something else, something she couldn't quite read. But it didn't matter. Whatever explanation Emeka had, whatever words he might try to use to smooth over the situation, Cindy didn't want to hear them. She had seen enough. Tears stung Cindy's eyes, her body trembling as she turned and fled into the night. She couldn't take it anymore. Helen had won. Her heart broke in that moment, splintering into pieces that felt impossible to put back together without a word. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Cindy barely made it back to her apartment, her legs trembling beneath her as she collapsed onto the floor, her breath coming in raged gasps. She had never felt so alone, so utterly devastated. Her entire body ached with the weight of her heartbreak, and she could barely think straight through the flood of emotions coursing through her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't need to look to know it was Emeka. He had probably followed her, called to explain. But what could he possibly say that would make this right? Cindy, please pick up, let me explain. She stared at the screen, her vision blurred by tears. Every time his name appeared, her heart shattered all over again. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, too painful. How could she believe anything Emeka said now? After seeing him with Helen like that? Cindy had fought so hard to build her life in Lagos, to prove to herself that she was more than just a girl from a forgotten village. But all it had taken was one night, one moment to tear everything apart. Emeka had been the one person she thought she could trust. The one person who saw her strength and believed in her potential. And now, that trust was gone. The calls kept coming, but Cindy shut her phone off and threw it across the room, not caring where it landed. She buried her face in her hands and wept, the sound of her sobs filling the room. All the doubts, the rumors, the messages, it all made sense now. Helen had succeeded in her game, and Emeka had fallen right back into her orbit. Cindy wanted to scream, to release the hurt that had built up inside her over the past few weeks. She had fought so hard to build a new life for herself, to escape the shadows of her past. But now, it felt like everything she had worked for was slipping through her fingers. She thought about leaving, about packing her things and disappearing from Lagos altogether. Maybe Nsukka wasn't such a bad place after all. Maybe she could find peace there, away from the chaos of the city, away from Emeka and the life she had tried to build. But deep down, she knew that running away wouldn't solve anything. She had been running her entire life, from her grief, her loneliness, and now from the pain of betrayal. This time, though, Cindy realized she couldn't keep running. She had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. While Cindy spiraled into heartbreak, Emeka was initially far from feeling guilt. After working out on Cindy during their last argument, he hadn't contacted her, not because he didn't care, but because his anger had consumed him. The scars from Helen's betrayal still lingered, and the thought of Cindy being another person he couldn't trust had ignited a rage inside him that he couldn't control. Helen had planted the seeds of doubt perfectly. Emeka was convinced Cindy had betrayed him, just like Helen had years ago. And that's why on the night when he visited Helen's building, it wasn't out of affection or longing for his ex. It was out of desperation. He needed answers, and he thought Helen was the only one who could provide them. But he didn't know he was going to make everything much worse. He trusted his instincts concerning Cindy. He knew more than Helen could ever. It was that same instinct that compelled him to approach her in Nsukka. But now, he was trying to rely on the one who betrayed him to understand the one who was loyal. How could he have been so gullible and confused? He remembered distinctly why he went there that night. He stood as he remembered their conversation. "You set this up, didn't you?" Emeka had asked, his voice low as he stood in the shadow of Helen's apartment. Helen's eyes gleamed, but she played innocent. "I don't know what you mean, Emeka. You have always been so paranoid." Emeka shook his head, clenching his fists at his sides. "I'm not paranoid. You have been pushing this from the beginning, making me doubt Cindy." Helen smiled, crossing her arms as he leaned against the door frame. "Maybe I have been looking out for you, Emeka. Have you ever thought about that? Maybe I didn't want you to get hurt again." Emeka's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. But before he could press her further, Helen had looked behind him, smiled a wicked grin, and latched her mouth onto him, all in a split of a second. At first, he had been too shocked to react until something crossed his mind. What if somehow, by some weird coincidences, Cindy saw him in this exact position with Helen? That was when he had pushed Helen and looked back, and true to his mind, there was Cindy, standing, looking like a train had hit her. His heart sank as he turned and saw her standing at the corner, frozen in place. Watching them, her face was pale, her eyes wide with hurt and disbelief, and then, just like that, she turned and ran. A wave of frustration and anger had washed over him. He had wanted to chase after her, to explain that this wasn't what it looked like, but part of him, the part that still felt betrayed, held him back. Helen took a step closer, her voice softening. "She doesn't understand you, Emeka. She doesn't know you like I do." Emeka's temper flared. "No, Helen. It's you who don't know me at all. Let this be the last time you put this dirty stunt on me or Cindy ever again. And for this, you will pay a price you wouldn't believe I am capable of giving." He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Helen standing in the doorway. Those doubts had been festering in his mind for weeks, gnawing at his trust, and Helen had been there at every turn, subtly reinforcing those fears. It had started so innocuously, just casual remarks about Cindy's background, about how little they really knew about each other's past. But the longer Helen stayed in his orbit, the more those doubts took root, and Emeka, already scared from his past with Helen, had let those doubts fester until now they had exploded into a full-blown catastrophe. Emeka cursed himself for being so easily manipulated. He had promised Cindy that Helen was in his past, but he had failed to truly sever the ties that bound them. Helen's presence in his business had allowed her to stay close, to meddle in his life in ways that he hadn't anticipated, and now, because of his own weakness, he had lost Cindy. For hours, he paced his apartment, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. The look on Cindy's face as she saw him with Helen haunted him, gnawing at his conscience. He had wanted to explain, to run after her and tell her the truth, but the damage was already done. She had seen enough to believe the worst, and Emeka knew that it was his fault. He had allowed Helen to stay too close far too long. But now, his mind was clearer. He could see all the loopholes he had created with his own hand. He had allowed the trauma he suffered at Helen's hand complicate the simple and beautiful relationship he had with Cindy. She has never wanted his money. It took him a whole lot to even convince her to relocate to Lagos, and she only agreed when he agreed she could work for herself. She has never accepted unnecessary money gifts from him. So how could he ever believe she was with him for the money like Helen was? He rubbed his head in frustration as he thought of ways he could use to get across to Cindy. He realized now how much she had endured to keep them going, and all she got in return was his doubt and insecurities. But even as his guilt ate away at him, Emeka couldn't let go of the doubt that had led him here. He needed to know the truth. He needed to know the seeds Helen had planted so he would know how to repair the damages. Days passed, and Emeka buried himself in work, trying to forget the mess his personal life had become. Deep down, something didn't feel right. The doubt, the inconsistencies began to eat at him. Then one afternoon, fate intervened. Emeka was in his office packing garage, gathering his things after a long day, when he overheard a conversation between two voices he recognized, Helen and Tunde, one of his trusted staff members. "I did what you asked," Tunde was saying, his tone impatient. "I helped you frame her, spread the rumors, even faked those texts. You promised me payment, Helen." Emeka froze in shock, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a step back, hiding in the shadows as he listened. Helen's voice was sharp, dismissive. "You will get your money, Tunde, but don't rush me. Cindy is out of the picture now. That's all that matters." Emeka's mind raced. He had suspected Helen of stirring up trouble, but this was the confirmation of something much darker. She had manipulated him, twisted the truth, and framed Cindy just to ruin their relationship, and he had fallen for it. His blood boiled with rage and guilt. How could he have been so blind? He had let his past with Helen cloud his judgment, and now Cindy had paid the price for his inability to trust. He stepped forward, his voice cold and furious. "Helen!" Both Tunde and Helen turned, their faces going pale as they saw him standing there. "Emeka," Helen began, her voice faltering. "I save it," Emeka growled, his eyes burning with anger. "I had everything." Tunde took a step back, clearly terrified, but Emeka's focus was solely on Helen. "You did this," Emeka continued, his voice low but deadly. "You made me believe Cindy had betrayed me, when all along it was you." Helen tried to speak, but Emeka cut her off. "I don't want to hear another word from you, Helen. We are done. Professionally, personally, in every way. I will deal with Tunde myself." Without waiting for a response, Emeka turned and walked away, his mind already racing with how to fix the damage he had done. That night, Emeka stood outside Cindy's apartment building, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't spoken to her in days, hadn't explained the truth, but now he had to make things right. He couldn't let her believe that he had chosen Helen over her, or that he had doubted her loyalty for even a second longer. With a deep breath, Emeka knocked on the door, his nerves frayed as he waited for her to answer. When Cindy finally opened the door, her eyes were red, and it was clear that she had been crying. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression a mixture of hurt and confusion. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emeka took a step forward, his gaze intense. "Cindy, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I have to tell you the truth. Helen framed you. She and Tunde, they spread the rumors, fake messages, and manipulated me into believing you had betrayed me. I was wrong, Cindy. So wrong, and I'm sorry." Cindy blinked, her breath catching in her throat. "How is that a news?" Emeka was taken aback by her words, his face raw with emotion. "You are the only one who needed that confirmation," she said, trying to close the door again. But Emeka was quick. He held onto the handle as he continued to plead with her. "Yes, I was a fool to believe her. I let my past with her blind me to the truth, and I hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I need you to know, I never stopped loving you." Cindy stared at him, her heart torn between the pain of the past and the truth he had just revealed. She knows she also played into Helen's hand by allowing the rumors and side talks get to her, but that does not excuse the sin she witnessed with her own eyes. If she was going to give this a chance, she needed to be sure what happened never occurs again. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Cindy whispered, her voice trembling. You hurt me, Emeka. You broke my heart. Emeka's eyes softened, filled with regret. I know, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you will let me. First, I want to understand what was going on that night, Cindy said, crossing her arms. She would not let him in until she had his explanation. Emeka cleared his throat and said, she called me about an urgent business, and I also wanted to clarify some things with her, but she must have seen you before I did, which is why she did that immediately. I suspected immediately, which is why I turned and then saw you there. I promise you, Cindy, I have no emotional attachment to Helen whatsoever. I might have allowed my anger against her play a role in our relationship, and for that I am so sorry. But I have seen where my errors were, and I am working on them. I promise you, there will never be a problem again. Please, give me another chance. Cindy stood for a long time looking him, her face unreadable, before she told him she would think about it and said her goodbye. The next day, Emeka confronted Helen in her office, his face set in a storm of anger and desperation. We need to talk, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Helen looked up from her desk, surprised by the sudden visit and intensity in his tone. Emeka, please, let me explain what happened yesterday. It wasn't what you think. I once told you that I will make a move that will shock you, but you have thought me a fool who will never be able to detangle from your web of lies and manipulations. That is why you insisted on doing what you are doing. You have been feeding me lies about Cindy, Emeka growled, stepping closer to her. You have been planting doubt in my mind, making me question her. Why? Helen's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as she realized the game was up. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Emeka snapped. Helen's calm demeanor cracked, and for a moment, there was a flash of panic in her eyes, but she recovered quickly, her voice icy and defensive. You need to know the truth about her, Emeka. I did what I had to do to protect you. Protect me? Emeka's voice was filled with disbelief. You destroyed the one good thing in my life, and you think that's protecting me? Helen stood, her expression hardening. You don't know her like I do. You don't know what she's capable of. Emeka smiled, looking at her with resignation. I don't even know what I am doing here or why I am arguing with you. You know Cindy more than I do, Emeka said, his voice cold. This time, breaking into full laughter. To think I ever had anything to do with you, he said at last, looking disgustfully at her. I have severed every connection you have with my business. Your lawyers will contact with the details. I made sure to compensate you handsomely. So if you work hard enough, you may not go bankrupt. But if you continue with your reckless lifestyle, well, that's your business. He turned to walk out and felt something hit his shoulder. He turned unsurprised to see Helen staring at him with such hatred and bitterness. How dare you? She screamed. You think you can just walk away from me? Well, newsflash, you can't. I have contacts of your business associates and partners, and I will make sure that you pay for this insult. Emeka walked back at her table and said in a very quiet, clear voice, they are already aware of this arrangement. But if you dare make any rash move, I will make sure you go back to that dirty, penniless fruit seller you were when I met you. Without waiting for a response, Emeka turned and stormed out of her office, his mind racing with anger, guilt, and a desperate need to make things right with Cindy. The next evening, Emeka stood outside Cindy's apartment, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he knocked on the door, doubt crept into his mind. What if Cindy don't want to talk to him again? The door opened slowly, revealing Cindy on the other side. Why are you here again, Emeka? Cindy asked, her voice strained. Emeka took a step forward, his voice thick with emotion. Cindy, I know I've hurt you, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. And I know you asked for time, but I can't sleep. Can't think straight anymore. Please have mercy on me. Cindy stared at him, her heart already melting. She couldn't deny the fact that she felt the same way, and knowing she was also at fault in all of this. She felt maybe they still have a chance to work things out. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything that had happened between them hanging in the air. But as Cindy looked into Emeka's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before. genuine remorse, and a love that had never disappeared. Slowly, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter her apartment. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a start. They sat on a sofa, staring at each other, but Cindy, gathering her thoughts, said, "So, you are telling me," Cindy said, her voice raw, "that all of this, it was her, that you believed her lies over me?" Emeka's face twisted in anguish, his hands reaching out in desperation. "I was wrong, Cindy. I was so wrong, and I didn't expect you to forgive me. But I couldn't let you go. You deserved better from me." Cindy looked away, the pain in her chest tightening, and she tried to comprehend the betrayal. The betrayal wasn't just Helen's manipulations. It was that Emeka, the one person she thought had seen her for who she truly was, had doubted her so easily. The memories of their time together, the moments she thought were genuine, now felt tainted by the shadow of this mistrust. "You don't understand," Cindy whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't know what it felt like to watch you with her. To think that you had chosen her all over again. After everything we have been through, you still let her poison our relationship." "I know," Emeka said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I let her get into my head, but I swear to you, Cindy, I never stopped loving you, not for a second." Cindy's heart ached at his words, but she couldn't ignore the anger that had been building inside her. "Love isn't enough, Emeka. Trust is everything, and you didn't trust me when it mattered most." Emeka's face fell, his hands trembling as he struggled to find the right words. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I just wanted you to know the truth. I let my past with Helen destroy what we had, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But you deserve better than what I gave you." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the truth hanging between them. Cindy's mind raced, torn between the love she still felt for him and the pain that had consumed her for so long. She didn't know if she could ever truly trust him again, but she couldn't deny that hearing the truth brought a strange sense of relief. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I need time, Emeka. I need time to figure out if I can ever trust you again. You hurt me deeply, and I can't just forget that." Emeka nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll wait for as long as it takes." Cindy looked at him, her heart heavy but stayed here now. She didn't know what the future held for them, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. The days that followed were filled with reflection for both Cindy and Emeka. Cindy took the time she needed to heal, focusing on her work and rebuilding the part of herself that had been fractured by the betrayal. She spent hours thinking about her relationship with Emeka, trying to untangle the love from the pain, and wondering if they could ever move past what had happened. Emeka, for his part, made good on his promise. He didn't push Cindy or try to rush her decision. Instead, he took a step back and focused on making amends, not just with her, but with himself. He began seeing a therapist, determined to walk through the deep trust issues that had plagued him since Helen's betrayal years ago. He knew that if he wanted any chance of a future with Cindy, he had to confront his past head-on. Weeks turned into months, and though they kept their distance, Cindy and Emeka remained in contact, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy. There were days when Cindy wasn't sure if she could ever fully forgive him, and Emeka often found himself battling the guilt that weighed heavily on his heart. But despite the challenges, there was a flicker of hope. Emeka's consistent efforts to show Cindy that he had changed, that he was willing to fight for their relationship, began to soften the walls she had built around her heart. He no longer let doubt control him, and in those moments when fear crept back into his mind, he forced himself to remember what was important: Cindy. Emeka took a deep breath, his heart racing as they sat in a park, enjoying the evening breeze. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we have been through, and I know I've hurt you, but I still love you, Cindy. I always have, and I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you will let me." Cindy's heart fluttered, but she remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. "I know things will never be the same," Emeka said, his voice filled with emotion, "but I believe we can build something stronger if we try. I want to rebuild that trust, to prove to you that I'm worthy of your love, but I can't do it alone. I need you to believe in us too." Cindy looked at him, for a long moment, her emotions swelling. She had spent months healing, learning to stand on her own again, but part of her still held on to love she had for him. It had never truly gone away. Slowly, she stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. "You hurt me, Emeka," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I see how much you have changed. I see how hard you have worked to make things right." Emeka's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her next words, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm willing to try," Cindy said finally, "but we'll take it slow, one step at a time." A wave of relief washed over Emeka and he smiled, a genuine heartfelt smile that made Cindy's heart ache in the best way. "One step at a time," he repeated, his voice full of hope. And with that, they took the first step towards rebuilding the future they had once dreamed of. This time with trust, understanding, and a love that had been tested but never broken. Months passed, and though the road to rebuilding their relationship wasn't almost smooth, Cindy and Emeka worked together to heal the wounds of the past. Emeka continued to show Cindy that he was committed to earning her trust, and Cindy in turn allowed herself to be vulnerable again, knowing that love was a risk worth taking. Helen, once the shadow that had threatened to destroy them, faded from their lives completely. Emeka severed all business ties with her, and for the first time in years, he felt free from the toxic hold she had on him. Cindy and Emeka's love, though battered, had survived, and as they walked hand in hand through the bustling streets of Lagos, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and more deeply in love than ever before. Theirs was a love reclaimed, and it was theirs to cherish. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Cindy on African Stories. If you liked it and felt inspired with her journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.